President Trump's son-in-law has a 41-story size problem at 666 Fifth Avenue. Jared Kushner's company still holds half of the $1.2 billion mortgage and hasn't paid a cent, forcing the Kushners to look overseas for investors.
So what do you think the prospects are for your father-in-law in 2024 then, President Trump?
I see every day, people, even people who are not in favor of Trump are realizing that under President Trump, we had a peaceful world.
I've never seen it be 99% of a fund like this. U.S. private equity firms still raise the vast bulk of their money from U.S. investors. This is extraordinary, unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it.
Jeff Bennett explores the close relationship between Kushner, the Trump administration, and the Crown Prince that helped shape the deal.
As president, Donald Trump built ties with Saudi royals. One person was usually in the room, his son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner. Like Trump, Kushner arrived at the White House as a businessman with no foreign policy experience, but he quickly became a critical surrogate for Trump abroad and the architect of much of the administration's Middle East strategy.
We hope that this will start an even more historic journey for the Middle East and beyond.
People said when he got into power, he would create World War III. Well, there were no new wars. He was making peace deals. The Middle East, which was one of the thorniest issues for American diplomats and politicians and military for 2 decades, became a very peaceful place with a lot of momentum. And in just a couple short years, you've seen what happened when there's passive leadership and weak leadership from America and the world. And, we have 2 massive wars that have the chance to metastasize further. And quite frankly, the lack of relationships that we have with countries right now, where we're doing strong diplomacy, keeps these conflicts in a place where they can get much worse.
A $2 billion investment that former President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, secured last summer from a fund led by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has raised questions about the ethics of post-White House business dealings. Kushner's private equity firm secured the investment after Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman overruled a host of objections from the sovereign wealth fund's advisors.
A cover story in Time with no interview.
The idea that there are people who serve in government. I mean, you'll remember Jared Kushner was the secretary of everything, right? He just did whatever he wanted.
Everything and nothing.
Everything and nothing. So that guy is now going to develop government property with another guy who met the government.
Charge of intelligence.
Right. Who met the government officials through the Trump administration. Oh, and by the way, Trump's daughter is married to that guy.
What I've seen, not just in the Middle East, but also in the world and in life, is that when the forces of good are winning, the forces of evil will try to stop them. In light of the attack, the Abraham Accords are more important than ever. Clearly, this is one of the hardest problem sets that's existed probably in geopolitics, but the end state has to look something like this, and it has to have 2 elements. Number one, Israel has to have the security to not be threatened by its neighbors and to be able to protect its citizens. That is absolutely crucial, is non-negotiable, and I do think a lot of the world agrees that that's something that should exist. The second element is that the Palestinian people have to have the opportunity to live a better life. And I think that if you go through the element, it's not just saying let's create a state. It has to be a state that can function and thrive.
And there's been a lot of talk in recent weeks about Hunter Biden and how was he trying to raise money off of his father's name and influence. And we should again note that Hunter Biden never worked in the White House. You know who did? Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner worked in the White House. And you've got a chart there that details the sources of his money. I'll let you explain it. But it should be noted here that Kushner also, his background in real estate, not exactly as a hedge fund magnate or a peace broker in the Middle East.
So you're right, Jonathan. Jared Kushner did work in the White House. He worked very hard. It's becoming a little less clear what he actually worked hard at, because after he left the White House, he went out and raised $3.1 billion, that's billion with a B, for a private equity fund. And as you pointed out, he's not a private equity guy. He's a real estate guy. So where did this money come from? Some of it we know from filing, some of it we know from press reports. What we know for a fact is he raised the $3.1 billion. What we also know for a fact is that only about $30 million of it actually came from investors in the United States. All the rest of it is foreign money. And of that foreign money, $2 billion of it came from the Saudis. And not only did it come from the Saudis, but the Public Investment Fund, which is the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, from which this money came, the board of it voted against giving the money to Jared, and they were overruled by MBS, who said, give him the $2 billion. I've been in this business 40 years. I have never seen someone get $2 billion out of $3 billion, get 2/3 of their money from a single investor. Usually a single investor might be a few percent of the fund, might be 5%, occasionally 10%. Never seen this. Another 200 million, we believe, came from Qatar. Another 200 million, we believe, came from the UAE. And then the 625 million that came from foreign investors that we don't even know who they are. So what was Jared Kushner doing in the White House? And by the way, as a fun fact, on January 6th, the famous January 6th, Jared Kushner was in the Middle East.
Steve, I heard from a prominent Middle East investor a couple weeks ago that there's not much out there on how Jared has actually been able to execute his funding. He's got all this money, but like you and Jonathan said, his background is not in private equity. And I've seen only one news report of a small European investment. He's sitting on all this money. Are the Saudis investing with him just to hedge their bets politically in case Trump comes back into office?
At least those are your words, not mine, but it's certainly a reasonable speculation. Yeah, we haven't seen him do a lot with this money. He has hired some people. I do know that. I think you mentioned to me during the break that you'd seen one investment that I hadn't even seen. I've seen nothing else about what he's actually done with the money. It is normal to invest this money over a period of several years, so I don't think we can draw a firm conclusion yet. But again, we're going back to a guy who's a real estate guy, and frankly not a particularly good one at that, who suddenly got $3 billion trying to do private equity deals, competing against people who've been in the business a long time.
On this front, there's some brand new reporting. It broke a couple minutes before we came on the air in the New York Times. New York Times reporting that Jared Kushner confirmed that he is closing in on a major real estate deals in Albania and Serbia, the latest example of the ex-president's family doing lots of business abroad, even as Trump seeks to return to the White House. Kushner's plans in the Balkans appear to have come about in part through relationships he built while working for his father-in-law while Trump was in office. And, quote, these first two projects both involve land now controlled by governments, meaning a deal would have to be finalized with foreign governments.
At that point, Kushner, then 37 years old, and the Crown Prince, who was 33, spoke regularly. The New York Times reported they were on a first-name basis, calling each other Jared and Mohammed in text messages and phone calls. In a rare interview, Kushner told CNN that in those conversations, he'd offered advice.
Just to be transparent, to be fully transparent, the world is watching this.
After intelligence officials concluded MBS had given the order, the Senate condemned him.
Unanimously, the United States Senate has said that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is responsible for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
But Kushner wouldn't go that far.
I don't know what the administration's waiting for in terms of accountability.
I believe that there's a report that they're working on. They've been doing an investigation, and when they have the facts of the investigation, then it'll be up to the president to make a determination on what he wants to do.
The administration never punished Saudi leaders for Khashoggi's killing or for their military actions in Yemen. All of this colors the $2 billion investment that Kushner received from MBS last year, says Kathleen Clark, an ethics professor at Washington University and St. Louis School of Law.
Kushner being able to exploit his access to the president, his power within the Trump administration, and translate that directly into extraordinary personal financial benefit for himself. I mean, Trump talked about draining the swamp, and we have a swamp monster in this story.
Is there anybody here who would like to see me run again?
With Donald Trump floating a potential run in 2024, the scrutiny of Kushner's dealings only intensifies, Clark argues.
There is some law on the books that should prevent Kushner from participating
The idea of Kushner not being involved in a second Trump White House is interesting because given his role as the president's son-in-law, the stuff he says to the president, if he were to be president again, would still carry enormous weight whether he has a formal role or not, right? What he says at brunch on a Sunday morning is just as important to Donald Trump as what his paid advisors might say. And I think you heard Kushner kind of expand on this idea of why he wouldn't come back but could potentially still be influential.
In his first presidency, Ivanka Trump served as a key advisor, and her husband, Jared Kushner, took on a major and controversial role in a number of projects, including Middle East diplomacy.
Do you pose a grave national security concern to the country, Jared Kushner?
Look, I can say that in the White House, I work with some phenomenal people, and I think over the last 2 years, the president's done a phenomenal job of identifying what are our national security priorities. He's had a great team in place that are helping implement it, and I hope I've played a good part in pushing those objectives forward. And I think because of the president's leadership, the world is safer today.
You know, Jared had a very easy life. He was doing phenomenally in New York, and everything he touched is turned to gold. And then one day he said, I want to come down and I want to have peace in the Middle East, and I want to do criminal justice reform, and I want to do all these wonderful things. And his life became extremely complex. And he wouldn't trade it. I don't think he'd trade it because what he's doing is incredible. And he is doing great in the Middle East. I think you're going to have someday, before we're finished, I think you're going to have something very important signed. And I hope so. You're doing a great job. Thank you.